Welcome to my channel. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor. Her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face as she adjusted the color palette of a client's logo for what felt like the 100th time. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of leaves outside the window. It was a silence she had grown accustomed to, though not one she particularly enjoyed. Mark had left for work hours ago. His usual routine of a quick kiss on her forehead and a murmured "love you," barely registering before he was out the door. She had watched him go. His tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to her oversized sweater and messy bun. He always looked so put together, so in control. It was one of the things she had admired about him when they first met. His confidence, his ambition. But lately it felt more like a wall than a bridge. She sighed, closing her laptop and stretching her arms above her head. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second a reminder of how long the day still was. She glanced at her phone, half hoping for a message from Mark, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. "Stop it," she muttered to herself, shaking her head. She was being ridiculous. Mark was busy, that was all. He had a demanding job, and she knew better than to take his silence personally. Still, the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach refused to go away. It wasn't just the lack of communication, though that was part of it. It was the way he had been acting lately. Distant, distracted, almost like he was somewhere else even when he was right beside her. She had tried to brush it off, chalking it up to stress or fatigue, but the excuses were starting to wear thin. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing. She grabbed it eagerly, her heart lifting at the thought of hearing from Mark. But the name on the screen wasn't his. Sophie ***, hey, you free for a coffee? I need to vent. Emma hesitated, glancing at the half-finished design project on her laptop. She really should keep working, but the idea of getting out of the house, even for an hour, was too tempting to pass up. Emma ***, sure. Meet you at the usual spot in 20. Sophie's reply came almost instantly. Sophie ***, perfect. See you there. The cafe was bustling when Emma arrived, the air thick with a scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. She spotted Sophie at their usual table near the window, her dark curls bouncing as she waved Emma over. "You look like you need this," Sophie said by way of greeting, sliding a latte across the table. Emma smiled, sinking into the chair across from her. "That obvious, huh?" "Just a little." Sophie studied her, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "What's going on? You've got that look." "What look?" "The I'm overthinking everything look." Emma laughed, though it came out more like a sigh. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to me. Now spill." Emma took a sip of her latte, the warmth spreading through her chest as she gathered her thoughts. "It's Mark," she said finally. "I don't know. He's just different lately. Distant, I guess." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I don't know. He's just not present. Like he's here but he's not really here, you know." Sophie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Have you talked to him about it?" "I've tried. But every time I bring it up he brushes it off. Says it's just work stress and that I'm overthinking things." "And you believe him?" Emma hesitated. "I want to. But I don't know. Something feels off." Sophie leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Emma, I'm going to say this because I'm your best friend and I love you. But you need to trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to argue, to defend Mark, to convince herself that Sophie was wrong. But deep down, she knew there was truth in her friend's words. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Emma's mind kept drifting back to Mark. By the time she got home, the unease had settled into a heavy weight in her chest. She found herself standing in the doorway of their bedroom, her eyes scanning the room as if it might hold some clue to what was going on. Everything looked the same: the neatly made bed, the framed photos on the dresser, the faint scent of Mark's cologne lingering in the air. But something felt different. Her gaze landed on his nightstand, and before she could second-guess herself, she was pulling open the drawer. It was mostly empty. A few pens, a spare charger, a stack of business cards. But at the very back, tucked beneath a folded handkerchief, was a small, crumpled receipt. She picked it up, her heart pounding as she smoothed it out. It was from a luxury hotel downtown, dated just a week ago. The same week Mark had been on a business trip. Her hands trembled as she stared at the receipt, the words blurring together. She wanted to believe there was an explanation, that it didn't mean what she thought it meant. But the sinking feeling in her stomach told her otherwise. The sound of the front door opening startled her, and she quickly shoved the receipt back into the drawer, slamming it shut just as Mark called out, "Emma, you home?" She took a deep breath, forcing a smile as she stepped out of the bedroom. "Yeah, I'm here." Mark appeared in the hallway. His tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. "Hey," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "How was your day?" "Fine," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "How was work?" "Busy," he said, already heading toward the kitchen. "But good. You know how it is." Emma watched him go, her smile fading as the weight of the receipt burned in her mind. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Things were about to change. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers gripping the crumpled receipt so tightly it threatened to tear. The numbers on the paper blurred as her vision swam with unshed tears. The date, the time, the location, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. Mark had lied to her. She had tried to rationalize it, to convince herself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a client meeting. Maybe he had lost his wallet and needed to check into the hotel temporarily. But deep down she knew better. The receipt was just the tip of the iceberg, a tangible piece of evidence in a puzzle she had been too afraid to solve. The sound of Mark's voice drifted in from the kitchen, his tone light and carefree as he hummed a tune she didn't recognize. It was infuriating how normal he seemed, how oblivious he was to the storm brewing inside her. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand answers. But fear held her back. Fear of what she might discover. Fear of what it would mean for their marriage. Taking a deep breath, she stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her sweater as if it might somehow steady her nerves. She needed to be calm to think clearly. But the moment she stepped into the kitchen and saw Mark leaning casually against the counter, a cup of coffee in hand, her resolve wavered. "Hey," he said, glancing up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You okay? You look off." Emma forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "I'm fine. Just tired." Mark nodded, his attention already drifting back to his phone. "Yeah, me too. Long day." The casual dismissal stung, but it also fueled her anger. She crossed the room, her movements deliberate, and set the receipt on the counter in front of him. "What's this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Mark glanced at the paper, his expression unreadable. "Where did you find this?" "In your nightstand," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Care to explain?" For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the receipt as if it might disappear if he stared at it long enough. Then, with a sigh, he set his coffee down and ran a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think," he said finally, his voice low. "Then what is it?" she demanded, her patience wearing thin. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you lied to me about where you were last week." Mark hesitated, his jaw tightening as he searched for the right words. "Look, I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact. But it was just a work thing. A client needed a place to stay, and I covered the cost. That's all." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. It was a plausible explanation, but something about it felt off. "Why didn't you just tell me that?" "Because I knew you'd worry," he said, his tone softening. "You've been so stressed lately, and I didn't want to add to it. I was trying to protect you, Emma." The words were meant to reassure her, but they only deepened her unease. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he was telling the truth. But the nagging feeling in her gut refused to go away. "Mark," she said slowly, "if there's something you're not telling me, now's the time to say it." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a long moment before he finally looked away. "There's nothing to tell," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear." But the hesitation in his voice, the way he couldn't meet her gaze, it told her everything she needed to know. Later that night, as Mark lay sleeping beside her, Emma found herself wide awake, her mind racing with unanswered questions. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something Mark wasn't telling her. Quietly, she slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway to his home office. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the window. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the desk lamp, before finally flipping it on. The desk was cluttered with papers and files, the remnants of Mark's work. She began sifting through them, her heart pounding as she searched for something, anything that might give her answers. It didn't take long to find it. Tucked beneath a stack of invoices was a small, leather-bound notebook. She recognized it immediately. It was the one Mark always carried with him, jotting down notes and reminders. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open, her eyes scanning the pages. At first it was just work-related notes, meeting times, client names, project deadlines. But then she saw it. A name, written in bold letters and circled several times. Lily. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the notes beside it. Dates, times, locations. And then, at the bottom of the page, a single sentence that made her stomach drop. Asterisk, tell Emma soon. She deserves to know. Asterisk. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on her. She didn't need to read any more to understand what was happening. Mark was having an affair. Emma stood frozen in Mark's office, the notebook trembling in her hands. The words on the page seemed to pulse with a life of their own, each one a dagger to her heart. Lily. The name echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the betrayal she had tried so hard to deny. She didn't know how long she stood there, staring at the notebook as if it might somehow rewrite itself. But eventually, the numbness gave way to a searing anger that burned through her veins. She slammed the notebook shut, the sound echoing in the quiet room, and stormed back to the bedroom. Mark was still asleep, his breathing slow and even, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. For a moment, she considered waking him, demanding an explanation, but the thought of facing him, of hearing his lies, made her stomach churn. Instead, she grabbed her phone and slipped out of the room, her movements quick and silent. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped outside, the quiet street bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away, to clear her head. Her feet carried her to the park at the end of their block, a place she and Mark used to visit often in the early days of their marriage. She sank onto a bench, her hands clutching her phone as she stared at the screen. Sophie's name flashed in her mind, and before she could second-guess herself, she was dialing her best friend's number. Emma! Sophie's voice was groggy with sleep, but it sharpened instantly when she heard the tremor in Emma's voice. What's wrong? It's Mark, Emma choked out, the words tumbling from her lips in a rush. He's having an affair. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line before Sophie spoke again, her voice firm. I'm coming over. No, I'm not at home, Emma said quickly. I'm at the park. I needed to get out. Okay, Sophie said, her tone softening. Stay there. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead, and Emma let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone to her chest. She felt like she was drowning, the weight of Mark's betrayal pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Sophie arrived sooner than expected, her car pulling up to the curb with a screech of tires. She was out of the car in an instant, her arms wrapping around Emma in a tight embrace. Tell me everything, Sophie said, pulling back to look at her. Emma did, her voice breaking as she recounted the receipt, the notebook, The name Lily scrawled across the page. Sophie listened in silence, her expression growing darker with each word. "I knew it," Sophie said finally, her voice tight with anger. "I knew something was off with him. I'm so sorry, Emma." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What do I do, Sophie? I don't know what to do." Sophie hesitated, her grip tightening on Emma's hands. "You need to confront him. You can't let him get away with this." "I know," Emma whispered, though the thought filled her with dread. "But what if he denies it? What if he tries to make me feel like I'm crazy?" "Then you leave," Sophie said firmly. "You don't deserve this, Emma. You deserve someone who respects you, who loves you enough to be honest." Emma nodded again, though her heart ached at the thought of leaving Mark. Despite everything, she still loved him. But love wasn't enough to erase the pain of his betrayal. When Emma returned home, the house was still quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching Mark sleep for a long moment before finally stepping inside. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Wake up." He stirred, blinking up at her in confusion. "Emma, what's wrong?" She didn't answer, just held up the notebook, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Who's Lily?" Mark's face paled, his eyes widening as he stared at the notebook. For a moment he said nothing, his silence speaking volumes. "Emma," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "Then explain," she said, her voice breaking. "Because right now, all I see is proof that you've been lying to me." Mark sat up, running a hand through his hair as he struggled to find the words. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Lily she's a colleague. We've been working on a project together and things got complicated." "Complicated how?" Emma demanded, her voice rising. "Did you sleep with her?" Mark hesitated, his silence answering the question before he finally nodded. "It was a mistake," he said quickly. "It didn't mean anything. I love you, Emma. You have to believe me." Emma stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "How can I believe you when you've been lying to me for months?" Mark reached for her, but she stepped back, his touch suddenly unbearable. "Emma, please," he said, his voice desperate. "I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." But the words rang hollow, the weight of his betrayal too heavy to ignore. Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if you can," she said softly. And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Mark staring after her, his face a mask of regret and fear.